Hi, I'm David, and we're here with EV World News. We talk about electric vehicles, green energy, and the stock markets. Hey, Bill, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going great, thank you.
All right, so let's get right into it. Our first article we're going to talk about today comes to us from Bloomberg, and this one is on carbon capture technology, which has been
Yeah.
kind of a big discussion. A lot of people are buying these carbon capture offsets. And here's the claim: carbon capture needs enough pipelines to circle the Earth 4 times. The U.S. goal to quit carbon dioxide hinges on transporting and burying more than 1 billion tons of carbon per year.
A year, yeah.
Now, and we're going to talk about some of this. What it discusses. There's a COP28, you know, talks about moving away from fossil fuels, and we'll get into that a little more. But they endorsed carbon capture and storage, and the U.S. is set to be the most important proving ground for capturing greenhouse gas and the sprawling network of infrastructure needed for it to work. Now, as I understand what the basic premise is of carbon capture, is we're taking CO2 that's captured, we're running it through a pipeline and putting it underneath some kind of
Yeah.
sink in
Yep.
terms of storing it generally in areas that were previously emptied of fossil fuels, correct?
Right. Right. Yeah.
And 83 billion of investments have poured into carbon capture over the past 3 decades. U.S. is making a new massive bet on carbon capture and storage. The country will be a test case for technology success or failure. The challenge starts with actually capturing the carbon dioxide. One of the primary ways to do it is to equip power plants and factories with systems to catch the emissions. The technology, which isn't economical yet in most scenarios, is only in use at a handful of sites.
Yeah.
And here we show a factory, the industrial flue gas comes out, gets captured in something here, moves through a couple of processes, and the CO2 stream eventually is compressed and liquefied and it is injected deep underground. And all projects to capture CO2 are unique, which makes them costly. Majority use two towers and a chemical solvent that includes a compound called amine to separate.
Yeah.
They're celebrating greenhouse gases.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Um, Another way to capture carbon is to suck it straight from the sky through
Yeah.
direct air
Just
capture.
try to bring it out of the air.
Would they be using paper straws or plastic straws for that?
Well, that's a good question.
Okay, let's see. Pumping CO2 into oil wells to make it easier to get
Hmm.
crude out of the ground can help cut
Yep.
costs.
Yep.
The process called enhanced oil recovery is the obvious downside of unearthing more fossil fuels. They'll ultimately lead to more emissions. Oil and gas companies are by far the biggest consumers of CO2, and the vast majority of the existing CO2 pipeline system is used for recovering oil.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a two-way system, apparently. Um, and this is interesting because the Inflation Reduction Act contains billions of dollars of incentives for carbon capture. Now, we were a little behind because Europe's been doing this for a few years. They've been offering these carbon capture credits.
Right.
And so it's a new thing for the United States, but it basically amounts to 50 to $80 per ton. And in Europe, they have the credits are available. If you and I figure out a way that we can simply reduce our carbon footprint by a ton, um, and can document how that occurred, then we could get that 50 to $80.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So, for instance, I was earlier talking to a friend who has a program that he's going to do in London, and it effectively would reduce um, the number of people who had to own cars. Okay.
Yeah.
And anyways, his system would basically issue enough carbon capture credits to I forget what it was. It was going to it worked out to about two or three, um let's just say at least two tons of carbon capture per person that would be on his system. And so he might have 50,000 people on his system, and so it might reduce 100,000
Yeah.
tons annually of carbon. But this is a little different in terms of what this is here. But one of the things is, I guess the point was there's not that much in the way of pipelines that even if we were trying to do that much carbon capture, this doesn't quite exist as far as the pipelines needed to make this work.
Yeah. Hey, I have a related to that. I have a question for you and the audience.
Mhm.
Do you know how much a gallon of gasoline weighs?
Well, a gallon is approximately 8 pounds.
Right. Now, when you burn that in an internal combustion engine and the exhaust comes out the tailpipe, how much does that exhaust now weigh?
Well, I'd assume it'd still be the 8 pounds,
No, because remember, when you're burning it, you're combining it with oxygen.
right?
And so you're combining it with enough oxygen that every gallon of gasoline we burn creates more than 20 pounds of CO2.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I had
more
no
than
idea.
more than 20
Okay.
pounds of CO2 for every, because to get it to work, to get that spark and that explosion to drive that cylinder down, you have to have oxygen. So you're forcibly combining in that process, you're forcibly combining carbon and oxygen together, CO2, right? Or two oxygen atoms and one carbon atom. And what comes out that tailpipe, there's more than 20 pounds of CO2 that gets burned. So what we need to do is figure out, don't use as much, and that was the whole point of the debates that were going on in Dubai. Is How can we get away from creating that 20 pounds of CO2 every time we burn the oil that comes out of the ground in Dubai and and Saudi Arabia and Russia. And interestingly, the world's number one fossil fuel exporter is, ta-da,
The
drum
US.
roll, U.S. Yeah. There were some articles that are critical of the United States because we're a little bit, we've got John Kerry over there, encouraging people, we got to get off this, but at the same time, America is the leading exporter of fossil fuels, and we are through for the liquid LNG, liquid natural gas exports. We're the guys that are basically, replacing the natural gas that Europe would have been buying from Russia, before the whole Ukrainian mess. So it's such a complicated. You see why they wrote, by virtue of the very fact that they put the words fossil fuel in the document, is regarded as a major step forward, because for 30 years nobody would even say the word fossil fuel in the official document that comes out of those COP meetings. But I was really surprised when I read that we would need enough pipeline from all these oil fields and gas, things like that, and whether we capture it to transport and then bury it in the ground somewhere, enough pipeline to circle the earth 4 times. That's just, I'm hoping that, that's a correct number, just not something to grab people's attention. But that's astounding.
Yeah,
But then
this is
it, but then it makes sense when you realize how much CO2 every gallon you and I burn in a gasoline powered car, or diesel for that matter, because diesel does the same thing.
mhm. It's interesting to see this where it'd be stored. Never what some of these places are places I didn't even realize that there was a lot of oil going on. I didn't know about this oil basin over here in Illinois.
Yeah.
And now I knew about the Williston Reserve from North Dakota, the
North Dakota. Yeah.
Bakken
Yeah.
oil or whatever.
Yeah.
They're going to store annually 100 million metric tons up there. Now the Permian Basin one, because I've had people, I've gotten in discussions about carbon capture, and they've all related to Permian Basin oil, because that's the really big oil field for the United States,
Yeah.
is down here in Texas. Let's see here. Oh, here's the proposed pipelines.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, they miss Omaha. Um,
Well,
yeah.
do you understand the threat that a pipeline represents? Because if you have, I mean, it's only compressed gas. Well, what is compressed CO2? Dry ice, right?
Oh, is it? I didn't know that.
So if you're pushing CO2 through this pipeline and you get a leak of
Uh-huh.
CO2, well, it's just a gas, but it's heavier. And so what it does is sinks and goes across the ground. And and if you're within that envelope of that gas, it'll kill you.
Really?
Yeah, it'll kill you. They had over in Africa, if you remember, they had a volcano that
Yeah.
erupted, and what erupted mostly was it released this basically tsunami of carbon dioxide that flowed down the slopes of the mountain, the volcano, basically a mountain, and ended up killing a lot of wildlife and a lot of people in the process. So that's the concern: is that okay? We can take all this stuff and send it to the Dakotas, good riddance, and pump it down into the ground and store it, 4 or 5, whatever, 6, 10,000 feet below ground. But getting it there is always, it will be fraught with concerns that you don't want
Interesting.
that to rupture at some point. So anyway,
So on this map, the black are existing pipelines,
yeah,
and the red or orange represent proposed pipelines to do this, which would
yeah,
be 96,000 miles, which would circle the Earth 4 times.
yeah.
Now, I don't quite understand all these little spines. I mean, are those places they're going to extract it, say here, and it's going to wind to here, and then, you know, go up this crazy path all the way up there? I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure there's a method to it. It's
Yeah,
just
well, it's apparent. Obviously, it's coming out of at the end of each one of those dendrils. One of those little pipelines is a source, whether it's an oil field or whether it's a ag processor or a power plant. And so they want to capture it from those sources. That I'm sure they've identified the largest sources, and that's how that map got drawn.
yeah, apparently we are the most prepared to do this.
Well, yeah,
Yeah, well, I'm just saying you'd have thought it'd be the Middle East or they leave Russia off of here, but Russia is one has more oil than the United States. They just don't drill it as much. But I just thought
well,
that was
yeah,
kind
and
of
they
interesting
and, and
article.
they and they to do it effectively, they need Western help. Um,
Right.
and of course, with the sanctions now, all that help's been pulled up and removed from the country. So now they don't have other than local population. I mean, the same thing in the Middle East. They very few of those people there in the Arab Gulf area are actually skilled petrologists, right, and geologists. They generally have to have people come in and work for them to get this up and get it running and maintaining it. So it's not it's not they have, for example, because of the sanctions, a lot of the Russian airliners now aren't flying because they can't get the parts, and B, they don't have the technicians necessary to keep them up in the air. So yeah. So I can see why there isn't a lot of emphasis on carbon capture there under their current political regime. That just
Well,
it's
right. No, I get that. I'm just stating that that's part of it. Here
yeah.
was the article about the COP 28. talking about Sultan Al Jaber. Um, says the summit brought transformational change to the planet.
Yeah.
200 nations met in Dubai, approved the first ever call for the world to transition away from fossil fuels, the top culprit of climate change behind a planetary crisis.
And that was a landmark, like I mentioned earlier, that all the previous COPE, none of the official documents that came out of that made any reference to transitioning, which was the safe word. Because other people were, we talked about this the last time. People were talking about, we need to basically get out of it. We need to have a structured plan, to do that. Well, they came as close as they could to doing that with the document that got agreed to yesterday. So, but that document also gives there's there are people pointing out there's a lot of loopholes there. Um, And one of those loopholes is one of the big loopholes is carbon capture, which, as we've just talked about, is a difficult and expensive proposition and is not currently economically viable. Now, could that change at some point? Certainly, carbon credits and things like that. But yeah, so
Well,
we've made some progress. I was a little more pessimistic on Tuesday when we did this. It looks like there is a consensus that at least we've taken a step. We've started to
right.
talk honestly about what fossil fuels are doing to us on an international basis, and we've even got the oil companies and countries, to recognize that and agree to make some progress in helping the world transition. So that's a positive step.
Oh, it definitely is. Definitely is. So here's an interesting article about what's going on in the EV charging space. Hundreds
Yeah,
of EV charging companies are all fighting over the best spots.
yeah,
And, I guess I can see this. I mean, if you're in that business, you want to be at the best spot. Obviously, uh, on the highway, all of the big, oh, like this shows a flying J, those they're much more than just a fueling spot. I mean, they have restaurants, they have all kinds of things for people to do. It's a lot different than going to just a basic, uh, you know, if they had it at like a 7-Eleven
yeah.
kind
Do
of thing.
you remember the old in the some of the photographs of the old gasoline stations of the 1920s and 1930s? There was this lone pump with a glass jug at the top of it that you cranked and filled up, and there was a little one room shack
Yeah,
behind that. That was the gasoline station of a century ago. And now, of course, we've got these things that are combinations of say guest restaurants, stores, bathrooms, showers, you know, all there
there
for everybody.
there is a truck stop over in Iowa on I-80 that
Mm-hmm.
has like a Michelin rating for the restaurant.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean it's really quite elegant what you know h- how nice some of those truck stops are.
yeah.
They're really quite
So
impressive.
we have that impresses me because we have truckers that have discerning tastes
Yeah.
in
Uh,
the food that they eat. So that's kind of cool.
so there are 900 EV charging companies around the world.
That astounded me. I had no idea.
That explains why we get so many of them sending us constantly press releases. I mean, they all want to be interviewed. It's really quite
Right,
interesting. It's like,
right,
wow. I really it's hard to comprehend how, and there's more that are in that industry that they aren't actually necessarily the charging company that provide tech to these people.
right,
I've seen
right,
everything from payment systems, software to make it interface
right.
with different things.
Yeah,
I've seen a whole lot of different um, companies in this space.
Yeah,
As glo
just for our listeners' benefit, I get a bunch of those every day, and I just CC them and send them over to David to deal with.
Yeah,
So it's my fault. I'm sorry.
well, that's okay. The sector is attracting a ton of players and investors, drawing in more than 12 billion in VC funding since
Yeah.
2012. You look at our customers like land grabbing game. This is
Well,
according
like who was it said, buy real estate, they're not making any more or something like that.
right, right. Yeah, let's see. Tesla's the king in the US, but more fuel stations and convenience stores are setting up contracts with other companies. Well, even though, but they say this Tesla, but in this part of the country, all of the Tesla charging stations are at Hy-Vees,
Yeah,
which is a grocery chain for
right.
those of you who don't live in our part of the country. Yeah, but and it kind of makes sense. You go in and you can buy groceries or, you know, just hang out in the parking lot.
Yeah, I'm kind of
Um,
surprised though why they didn't put one. We have a Hy-Vee just down the road here from me, and less than a mile, and they're supposedly listed as having a charging station there. But I asked the store manager; he didn't know anything about it. So, so
oh
we
wow.
don't. Yeah, so we do not have a charging. To my knowledge, we do not have a charging station at this particular Hy-Vee. But then I think where the one locally is located is over at the intersection of Interstate 80 and Interstate 29. And there happens to be a Hy-Vee there that's within a mile of the road, and it's perfect for. That's an ideal location. So you got a major interstate north and south, and a major interstate east and west.
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense. I'm sure there'll be more soon enough. Let's see. GM and Pilot Flying J are putting EV Go chargers at Flying J rest stops throughout the US. Well, they're no longer calling them truck stops, they're rest stops.
Rest stops, yeah.
Yeah. Plus, the search is on for prime real estate to construct purpose-built mega facilities with a few dozen fast charge units with plenty of amenities on offer. I'm aware of a West Coast chain of convenience stores that is based around EV charging only.
Yeah.
So
Why
there's a group
not?
that's coming in, they're putting in 400 stores, and they're all going to be just EV chargers. There won't be any gas.
Yeah.
Um,
That's cool. I like that.
yeah, I've tried to see if I can get them on here, but I've they keep talking about it, but they're really slow to respond.
Yeah.
Oh, let's see.
They're hunting for all that real estate they need.
Yep. Probably. Charging companies are clamoring to get exclusive contracts with companies like McDonald's and Starbucks. Makes a lot of sense.
Well, you know that Volvo just announced that they've cut a deal with Starbucks. So, they've got, I forget, something like a couple dozen charging stations that they've installed at Starbucks, mainly, I think, west of us, I believe, out in the Intermountain area and out into Oregon and Colorado and California and those areas.
It would make sense to have it there. Let's see. EV charging station placed in a prime location can take about 4 years
Yeah.
before it becomes profitable once utilization hits around 15%.
Yeah, that was an interesting number. I've always wondered about that, because being in the EV space all this time, I've always think, well, what if I would invest and cut a deal and buy some chargers and put them somewhere? And I kept that. Well, when would they be profitable? Well, 4 years, and you got to have 15% utilization. Now, I'm curious as to 15% of what? 15% of the total chargers get used, or 15% of the investment, or I wish I knew
It's
exactly a little
certainly
more
not of
what
a
that.
24-hour period.
No, no. Um, so if you've got 10 chargers there, and one of them gets used predominantly, that's 10%. So one and a half of those chargers get used all the time. I don't know. I'd like to know what that number meant. So if any listeners, if you know what that number meant, drop us a line.
I don't see that as a great investment. to if it takes 4 years to become
Yeah,
profitable. Hell, the
yeah,
things, what it appears is that they break sooner than 4 years, anyways.
yeah. And you got to reinvest and upgrade them and have contracts with people to go out and work on them and things like that. So yeah.
Let's see.
So how does Tesla do it?
Well, like I said,
They're
they,
building all these chargers and they're still making money. So somehow they figured it out.
you know, it helps that, with them, you just plug in the charger and it automatically dings your card. Okay, because you don't have to get the app out or anything like
Yeah.
that. So that helps a little bit, but it's you know, their like we were saying, their charging stations aren't anywhere magical, you know, for them. They I I see the high V's as a low-hanging fruit, but they're not going into but they've got a lot of their just own freestanding charging places, but they almost all are in parking lots that have a major grocery store. But who wouldn't want to? If I see people that are in the real estate space that have retail, and they all would like to see if they could get Tesla to come put chargers in at their place, because
Yeah.
they want those customers having time to go walk around and go through the shops, right? So it makes a lot of sense to want that on your property. Now, this is one I wanted to talk about today, which this one just kind of drives me crazy because Americans are increasingly concerned about electric vehicle battery
Yeah.
disposal despite growth of EV battery recycling. Okay, for starters, this is a little disingenuous. I don't know that Americans are really that concerned about anything. Okay, but that being said, um,
Super Bowl.
yeah, yeah, 71% of U.S. adults say they are concerned about disposal of used EV batteries. So
Yeah.
it's probably keeping them awake at night. Worried that EV batteries they're,
Well,
y'all think they're going in landfills.
yeah.
56% of survey respondents said EV batteries will cause toxic landfills, up from 48% in 2022. And that just seems kind of crazy. Most people have no idea. The batteries, when they come out of the car, first are recycled and put into use as energy storage for renewable energy.
Hmm.
And that's ever before they even consider recycling them. And the recycling business, there's huge growth of EV battery recycling companies.
Well,
Um,
yeah. I mean, I have an easy explanation for this. What is the most interaction that the average American has with a battery?
their cell phone.
No, I don't even know the cell phone so much. I think, we've all got, how many devices do we have around our houses that have double A and triple A batteries in them?
Right,
Right. And they, 6 months later, whatever it is, you got to replace it. Well, what do you do with that battery? Typically, you throw it in the trash. Now,
right,
hopefully, if it's lithium, you don't, because that's a problem. But most of those batteries are alkaline batteries, and for what I understand, that's generally not a problem putting those, in a landfill situation. Although obviously, we'd like to do better than that. But I think that's, and that, and the fact that you've got a lead acid battery, a big heavy thing sitting under the hood of your car or your truck that kicks the starter, right? And so that's I think what most Americans experience with batteries are things like this. And so yeah, they think their car is powered by lots and lots of these things. Well, not really. They're not really. They're big, and there's many parts and valuable materials in there that can be taken and repurposed, right? And there are companies being set up right now to do that. So I think it's simply just a matter of education. Again, we've got people have so many things going on in their lives that the last thing they worry about is, oh my God, where are those batteries going to go? Until they start to think about it, they think, oh crap, here's a car out there that's got all these little tiny batteries in them, and that's all going to end up in the landfill. We're all going to be dying. Of course, we all know, when we've heard about, the earlier batteries that had toxic materials in them and things like that. Um, so I can see it's an education problem. It's just making people aware of the fact of what these things are and how we're approaching it. You've got
But
a
I see people arguing about this all the time. These batteries are going to end up in landfills and all
yeah,
this other crap, and we're
yeah,
not going to be able to dispose of old electric vehicles and all that. And
no,
it's like, well, for starters, there's less harmful stuff in an EV than there is in a gas car because you take the batteries out and you repurpose them, and then you're
yeah,
just getting rid of the old chassis,
yeah,
and which doesn't have any liquids in it. You know, um,
oh,
so
yeah,
this Ascend Elements recovers 98 per. Now they actually go in and recycle the battery. They take out 98% of the critical metals and then use them to manufacture new sustainable EV battery materials. Now, what's interesting is under the Inflation Reduction Act, to qualify for the rebates on the cars, if the minerals were sourced in the US through recycling
mhm,
and you made batteries from them, then it counts as a US battery.
yeah.
So I thought that was kind of interesting, although the article didn't talk about that. But I thought that was um, kind of an interesting thing. 40% of survey respondents understood that they should not charge an e-bike or electric scooter battery unattended or overnight.
Well, that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah. Do you know though? Sometimes I wonder though, if you're asking this of just if somebody owns an e-bike, you'd like to think they'd probably know that. But if you didn't
Yeah.
own an e-bike, if you didn't own an e-bike, would you necessarily know that? You know what I mean? It's like, well, some of
Well,
the
it's starting to get. I mean, I see a lot of articles that are talking about right now, particularly. There's a lot of articles telling people that are appearing if you're going to buy, Christmas presents for your kids, and it's an e-bike or a scooter, be aware of this problem, right?
right.
So we're seeing, the public aware, and when I see articles, I don't always publish all of them, but if there's an educational value or adds a bit of information to it, I'll put it on our feed. Um, I feel a little bad about that sometimes because it leaves the impression that there's this huge fire risk out there. Yeah, there that has happened, and people have been injured, and property has been lost, and there's even been some deaths. So obviously, you have to, don't put an electric scooter in front of the back door of your house, right? Because if it just something goes on, it goes up in flame, you can't get out of the house. So those are issues, and they're being addressed, and there's progress being made technically as well as legislatively to address that. But as we've talked about before, far more gasoline fires in cars than there are of electric cars. I don't know if you saw the YouTube video where this car is parked on a hill and it's burst into flames. And they're calling the fire department, haven't quite gotten there, and the car starts to roll down the hill. And it kind of curves around and it smashes into a next to a business, and it's next to a power pole, and it's burning and burning and burning, and the power pole starts to catch on fire.
Wow.
So there's this, you know, gasoline car, yeah, electric cars. There have been fires, and it is a problem, but it ain't anything like as bad as if you've got a gasoline vehicle.
Huh. Well, you know,
So be careful if you're going to buy an electric bike or an electric scooter or a hoverboard or whatever unicycle, for your kids or for yourselves. Buy, get one for yourself. just be aware that you need to buy a good quality bike from a reputable manufacturer who uses a reputable manufacturer's batteries
Battery.
and charger. The charger UL listed and all those kinds of things. And you're fine. I mean, I've had electric bikes for over 20 years now. Never had an issue, but then I've always gotten them from, reputable manufacturers.
Well,
So
you look at we had the founder of Meiving on here, and he was saying that that's the biggest thing is just
yeah,
getting batteries from the right source.
yeah, yeah.
That doesn't have those problems. It's the cheap ones that generally cause
It's
almost all
yeah,
the
it's
problems.
the guys who are cutting costs and ripping off. I remember seeing a show, I think it was a YouTube video or something about how you can go off and you'll find these double A's and triple A batteries and things that said they're made by Panasonic or they're made by Sony or whatever. But you'll notice that in the fine print, there's misspellings and the name, Panasonic is slightly, as an example, is slightly misspelled. So it's not really Panasonic. It's Panasonic or something like that,
Bonus.
so there, yeah, there are people out there that their driving motive is profit, not concern for their customers. So,
Yeah, I get it. I get it. All right. Well,
all right,
we covered everything today, Bill.
cool.
Anyways, kind of a long show, but that's all right. Anyways, everybody, thanks for listening in. Leave us a comment if and tell us what you might like to hear about. Anyways, till
Yeah,
next time,
click that subscribe button.
aggressively, aggressively click.
Aggressively, right?